Hello and welcome to today's Completed Life Poetry Lunch Hour for the month of May. My name is Sarah Kiskaden-Bechtel and I am the Program Director for the Completed Life Initiative. At the Completed Life Initiative, we promote self-determination and dignity at the end of life. If you are new to our event programming, please feel free to explore our video archives on our website after today's event at www.completedlife.org. For today's event, we welcome back our resident literary scholar, Delano Copprue, PhD. Delano is a literary scholar and member of CLEA's esteemed advisory board. Over the course of his 2 decades of teaching, Delano has taught students of all ages, and he remains a proponent of the inherent value of lifelong learning. Today, Delano will be reading a selection of poems by W.H. Auden. Auden was a British-American poet active in the mid-20th century. He was noted for his stylistic achievements and his focus on political and religious themes. He won the Pulitzer Prize in 1947 for his long poem, The Age of Anxiety. Today, we will be reading a selection of poems that include Auden's musings on death and memory. Whether you are new to our Completed Life community or are a returning attendee, we invite you to think deeply and compassionately about mortality. The lens of artistic expression through poetry is an invaluable lens through which to evaluate these core elements of what it means to be human, as well as provides the learning tools meant to empower you to have an informed conversation for yourself and with your loved ones about the question, what does it mean to live a completed life? Before we begin, please be aware that you may input your questions and comments into the chat feature located on the lower right-hand corner of your screen. We welcome your thoughts at any time throughout today's event. If you'd like assistance with closed captioning, you may toggle on the box located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen that provides captioning for the spoken words of our event today. Throughout today's event, please feel free as well to tag us in your social media posts and tweets at Completed Life and hashtag Completed Life. Finally, the recording of today's event will be published after today's event concludes. All right. Thank you all so much for being here. And for those of you in the audience listening back to today's recording, welcome and thank you so much for tuning in. And I'm delighted to pass the microphone over to our esteemed Delano.
All right, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so happy to have you. I'm going to just present an image quickly for us. And I guess just to begin with W.H. Auden, and I think this particular image captures a little bit of what his schoolmasters may have said about him as a young lad growing up in Birmingham. That he was amazingly disorganized, and I think that's a particularly interesting place to begin. Just because in Auden's own poetry, he's carving out this tension in the human condition between the public chaos and the inner private selves that we have. And while we may cultivate a type of inner calm, we're as humans we're constantly pushed up against the swirl of the times around us. And this is I think this is a very important little tidbit to keep in mind because Auden is the youngest son of a doctor. when Auden was 7 years old, um, Europe erupted into war, and there were amazing technological advances happening. It seemed almost daily in his life. Um, all of a sudden there were radios, there were movies, there were airplanes. Lindbergh flew the Atlantic, and things were constantly speeding up as we kind of as humanity entered this very highly technical modern period. And so part of the one tension we will notice throughout the poems that we'll read today and discuss today is this tension between one's core belief and the demands of the world on the whole. I'm not sure if we'll get to this poem today, but it will be available in your packet. And this particular quotation, I think, captures a little bit about the beauty of poetry, the beauty of art. And this is a few lines from The Art of Healing. Every sickness is a musical problem, and every cure a musical solution. And we could spend all day exploring this, but we only have, I think, 50 minutes or so left. But one key highlight I'd like to bring out is that the search for harmony is critical to what Auden offers us in general. And we will begin to see this kind of take shape as we get into the poems themselves. These poems are very much about storytelling, they're about history, they are about how the personal and the public connect to one another. And one other thing I will add, and we'll get down to business here, is that when we're reading Auden, we are essentially entering a world in which history matters a great deal. Poetry is a civic responsibility. As a great T.S. Eliot said, every day we prepare a face to meet the faces that we meet. And so when we're thinking about the idea of poetry in general, for some it may seem as if it's a bit of a dalliance, but for poets and others, it is very much about a way that we prepare ourselves to encounter the world before us. And so with that said, I'm gonna turn it over to Zoe, who's in the cloud somewhere, and the first poem shall be "Let History Be My Judge." And so this poem, "Let History Be My Judge," already carries weight, um, in the sense that you have those two very big words there, history and judge, and so I'll just get into it, and then we'll begin to tease out little um, little details here along the way. So Auden writes this in 1928. He's 21 years old at this point. We're in the middle of this thing which is called the Jazz Age in the U.S. There's also a great sense of optimism arriving as well throughout Europe, and he writes as follows: "We made all possible preparations, drew up a list of firms, constantly revised our calculations, and allotted the farms, issued all the orders expedient in this kind of case. Most, as was expected, were obedient, though there were murmurs, of course, chiefly against our exercising our old right to abuse, even some sort of attempt at rising, but these were mere boys. For never serious misgiving occurred to anyone, since there could be no question of living if we did not win. The generally accepted view teaches that there was no excuse, though in the light of recent researches, many would find the cause in a not uncommon form of terror. Others, still more astute, point to possibilities of error at the very start. As for ourselves, there is left remaining, our honor at least, and a reasonable chance of retaining our faculties to the last. So there's a lot here in this poem, and we shall see that over the course of Auden's 46 years of writing poetry, history remains one of these themes that constantly appears in his work. So just to kind of open this poem up a little bit, but not to um, analyze it to the point of exhaustion, I'll just like to point out a couple of key points here. In that first stanza, you have calculations, right? Constantly revise our calculations. And calculations is an important theme for Auden, because he began to notice that within human societies, there was a bit of an insistence on the idea of metrics and how to measure. But how does one measure the human spirit? And so he's kind of butting his head up against that a little bit. This notion reaches a crescendo in the poem "The Unknown Citizen," in terms of having society try to map what a human is based upon one's own preferences or one's own economic behaviors. But as a poet, we have Auden is resisting that notion that people can be just identified in terms of data. There are things much deeper and much more unaccountable. Towards the end here, a couple other points come up. Is that the generally accepted view teaches that there was no excuse, though in the light of recent researches, many would find cause in a not uncommon form of terror. And these few lines here, particularly the generally accepted view, is something that Auden himself is constantly wrestling against. Um, the generally accepted view is one that needs to be challenged. And just kind of going along with the same sort of notion here, others still more astute point to possibilities of error at the very start. So this poem is ambiguous. There's a lot that isn't said, and part of this is in that second stanza. If you look at that second line, in this kind of case, we don't know what kind of case we're talking about. So essentially, this could be about anything in which, and to kind of bring this to a very direct and clear statement. Let history be my judge. Essentially, is Auden's plea, claim, hope that in a world that is increasingly divided, that we may begin to accept people as ourselves. The idea of being a good neighbor. And this is part of the point to possibilities of error at the very start, is that if we're beginning to kind of narrate a type of history, if we forget that we're connected to other people, we lose the bigger story of our connectedness. And again, and this is kind of quaint, but the last stanza says a lot in terms of, as for ourselves, there is left remaining, our honor at least, and a reasonable chance of retaining our faculties to the last. So, in a nutshell, here's Auden, 21-year-old kid, and having worked through the calculations of history, he lays claim that there are only two things we can hope for to retain a little bit of our honor and to have a bit of our faculties left at the end. Rather modest, but also very crucial. And this is largely because when Auden was in school, he was captivated by the Arthurian romances, and he was captivated by early medieval literature. And in those tales, honor matters a great deal. Honor and one's relationship with other people. And so he's attempting to keep a little bit of that boyhood chivalric code alive um, into the 20th century. And we'll see how he does along the way here. The second poem I'd like for us to consider is called Family Ghost. And this one's a bit more tangible in the sense that Auden has given us very concrete images to latch onto. And the notion of ghost came out last time when we were discussing Amanda Gorman, and ghosts remain crucial to the power of poetry, because at its core, language preserves something that's left. And if any of us have seen the handwriting of our ancestors on little pieces of paper, we're always kind of jarred and pulled back into this moment in which that even after we're gone, something remains behind. And it is precisely this same theme that Auden will raise in about 15 minutes from now when we're looking at his poem about W.B. Yeats, that the poetry was polite enough not to tell that the poetry lives on beyond the poet. So this one is called Family Ghost. The strings, excitement, the applauding drum are but the initiating ceremony, that of cloud, the ancestral face may come. And never hear their subaltern mockery, graffiti writers, moss grown with whimsies, loquacious when the watercourse is dry. It is your face I see, and morning's praise of you is ghost's approval of the choice, filtered through roots of the effacing grass. Fear, taking me aside, would give advice to conquer her, the invisible enemy. It is enough to turn away the eyes. Yet there's no peace in the assaulted city, but speeches at the corners, hope for news outside the watchfires of a stronger army. And all emotions to expression come, recovering the archaic imagery. This longing for assurance takes the form of a hawk's vertical stooping from the sky. These tears sought for a disobedient dream, the lunatic agitation of the sea. While this despair, with hardened eyeballs, cries, a golden age, a silver, rather than this, massive and taciturn years, the age of ice. And that line, there's no peace in the assaulted city, but speeches at the corners, hope for news, outside the watchfires of a stronger army. It's quite a visceral image here. It's very prescient, one might say, to our own time as well. And one thing that happens here is that in that beginning with that stanza, there's a return to the archaic imagery, as Yeats puts it. Essentially, one way to kind of deal with the present and the future is to look towards the past as a way of finding a type of form with which to confront, um, which to confront. I'm not sure if I'm just kind of checking my screen. Yes, that is the poem. Thanks, Zoe. Um, Looking at the form at the ancient forms as a way of understanding the present and perhaps the future. And if we can just go along to song 9 from or what's called the funeral blues. And this one, this particular poem is part of something called 12 songs. Zoe, you had it. Just go back to the Roman numeral 9, please. Thank you. Yeah, that's the one. And again, here we also kind of see the kind of ritual and ceremony that comes with passing. And we're not quite sure who passed away here. This could just be completely fictional. But what we do know is that there is something very moving and profound in this particular poem. As in a nutshell, the roll keeps spinning after our loved ones are gone. And these next series of poems will kind of capture this notion of how Auden saw our mortality. Our mortality is always against the human tapestry of things being dynamic and constantly in flux. And it's a very extraordinary vision, because it kind of acknowledges, among many things, how unimportant we are in the bigger scheme of things. And that could be a moment of that could be something that's reassuring, could also be something that's really frightening. Um, Auden doesn't really tell us how to feel about any of this. He just kind of paints his picture of it. And then another thing I like to point out here is that the verbs are fantastic, very strong verbs. Stop all the clocks, cut off the telephone, prevent the dog from barking with a juicy bone, silence the pianos, and with muffled drum, bring out the coffin, let the mourners come. Let aeroplanes circle, moaning overhead, scribbling on the sky the message, he is dead. Put crape boughs round the white necks of the public doves. Let the traffic policemen wear black cotton gloves. He was my north, my south, my east and west, my working week and my Sunday rest, my noon, my midnight, my talk, my song. I thought that love would last forever. I was wrong. The stars are not wanted now. Put out everyone. Pack up the moon and dismantle the sun. Pour away the ocean and sweep up the wood. For nothing now can ever come to any good. Quite powerful poem. And all that hurt is contained in these little rhyming couplets. Um, when you go through this poem, you can really see that attention to form as a way of articulating a hurt. And this form of poetry was shift in the mid 20th century with the confessional poets. But here we kind of see we see Auden working within the realm that we could say that Robert Frost is very much within the same category, that form matters, and that form has an enduring quality that helps connect us to the past and understand our connectedness throughout time. Um, Anything resonate with anyone here? We can pause. We can pause for a few seconds here to see if things hit anyone in a certain way here. That final little stanza is uh is both incredibly sad and incredibly almost dramatic, verging upon the comedic, in the sense that it's as if the world itself were a stage, and you can pack everything up when your loved one is gone. The stars are not wanted now. Put out everyone, pack up the moon, and dismantle the sun. And that sometimes is how grief feels when we retreat inwardly. We can say, "What does the world matter?" Or as Hamlet says, "The world delights not me." We want to kind of push those things aside. And but one thing we will see as well is that this theme does not go away. And in fact, the next couple of poems themselves both kind of play off this idea that this notion that the world keeps on spinning even as we're no longer in it. Um, we can also even, perhaps to a certain degree, think about Emily Dickinson's "Because I Could Not Stop for Death, He's kindly stopped for me." Um, and even this very quiet scene in James Joyce's "A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man," in chapter 2 of that, when Stephen Dedalus is sick at school and he's in the infirmary, and he thinks about everyone who's passed in his family, and he wonders if if that's what death feels like. You hear the world go on, but you're no longer a part of it. Or even as the great Tim O'Brien puts it in "The Things They Carried," another great book, um, there's a character named Linda, and she says being dead is like being a book upon a shelf that no one reads anymore. There still is a presence, but who will tell your story? Who will read your story? And so these little textual elements really touch upon something very elemental.
Delano, Liz commented in the chat the phrase, he was my north, my south, my east, my west, to speak to how grief, and especially the loss of someone so close, is so disorienting.
Mm, absolutely. Like all the compass points are gone. My working week and my Sunday rest as well. Seems like Auden didn't have a 4-day work week. Well, just a bit of humor there. But yes, I completely agree. So Zoe, we're gonna do this very exciting thing where I share my screen for a moment. Um, so let's see how this goes. Okay, I believe I'm sharing something.
All I see is a white page,
Okay,
unfortunately.
yeah, all is well. Let me just do this little doohickey.
There we go.
Okay, so this is Bruegel's um little sketch here, his little Icarus sketch, and I just want to kind of take us through this for a moment in terms of this wonderful landscape. And one thing that's very interesting about this particular painting is that this is kind of a classic little type of landscape where you have the foreground here. You have a farmer going about the business of putting seeds into the earth. You have commerce booming along here. Very idyllic landscape. Rocky crags here, and of course, tucked away here are these little pair of legs, right? And this is and this is the story of Icarus, according to Peter Bruegel, the elder, is that is that this this failure isn't important enough. But then again, one must think that Bruegel is being ironic here, because as an artist himself, the overall story of Icarus is a reaffirmation of the Greek belief in the middle way, that that creativity itself has to be this thing that serves a public good. It can't just be for oneself, but you bring it forth in order to share with others. And 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 Auden himself took great inspiration from this in his poem titled Musée des Beaux-Arts, where he looks at this idea of suffering, and why do we suffer, and why is Icarus just a tiny pair of legs here? Can I zoom in on that? Will not allow me to. So I'm gonna just bring us back for a moment. And Zoe, I'll let you work your magic on your end. And just the very opening of this particular poem is just quite exquisite, actually. About suffering, they were never wrong. There we go. It's coming into view. There we go. Thanks, Zoe. About suffering, they were never wrong. The old masters, how well they understood its human position, how it takes place while someone else is eating or opening a window or just walking dully along. How, when the age are reverentially, passionately waiting for the miraculous birth, there always must be children who did not specially want it to happen, skating on a pond at the edge of a wood. They never forgot that even the dreadful martyrdom must run its course anyhow, in a corner, some untidy spot where the dogs go on with their doggy life and the torturous horse scratches its innocent behind on a tree. In Bruegel's Icarus, for instance, how everything turns away quite leisurely from the disaster. The plowman may have heard the splash, the forsaken cry, but for him it was not an important failure. The sun shone as it had on the white legs disappearing into the green water, and the expensive, delicate ship that must have seen something amazing, a boy falling out of the sky, had somewhere to get to and sailed calmly on. So with this little tiny poem here, we see that Auden himself has done something quite interesting in terms of trying to infuse this sketch with a sense of humor and everydayness. It's difficult to execute, but he has done so. A couple lines that really stand out to me is are that second stanza. Children add a different element to it. Children and the horse are entities in this particular poem that are really thinking about their own little lives, and the dreadful martyrdom that must run its course isn't really elevated as such, and it's quite intriguing to kind of notice that something that has great meaning from one perspective can be very small from another perspective. And Auden he plays around with this notion. And I also think too that Auden is really playing around with the title here of this museum in southern France, the Musée des Beaux-Arts, or of fine arts, and essentially it's an idea that um style and decorative items are important, and they receive a great deal of attention, but in terms of their overall value, they can sometimes not be seen as useful. And this is the larger question of beauty. Um, is beauty a necessity? Um, the answer is, of course, yes, it is. But sometimes we forget that part because it may not be immediately apparent. What does beauty add to the world? What is the value of beauty? One might suggest. One might ask. Um, Auden here tends to he is being ambiguous again in terms of giving the notion that beauty both matters and it doesn't. And just to kind of take this a little bit further, as a poet, Auden believed that our job, our job as people, was to discover who we were as a person, and then to forget who we are. And that tension between thinking about coming to a knowledge of oneself and then forgetting oneself was necessary to avoid becoming a parody of oneself. Um, if you stick too close to being who you are, you could at times you become a parody of who you are. And this is part of the genius of Auden, is that in the next few poems, we're going to see that he's changing the form constantly. And why would he do that? In a very simple response would be, he is showing growth over time. He is an artist evolving. And so to keep doing the same thing just because you've done it doesn't get you very far. In fact, it might get you nowhere at all. So this is his little poem, and even some of you Frostian fans out there, Robert Frost fans, there's that one poem where the young lad loses his hand to a chainsaw, and the family keeps going on about their affairs. And on the one hand, that may seem a very cold statement, and it definitely tends to go that way. But at the same time, there's this notion that the world keeps on spinning, and people are living and being born, as well as all the other things that happen in the great big human family. But again, this theme again of death as seen against the larger pattern of existence is very clear here as well, where the dogs go on with their doggy life, as it were. Any questions, comments? Everyone's good? Okay, so kind of giving a little look at time here. We're going to do two more, and then we're going to cut to the final one. As anyone who knows me, you will know that I'm a big fan of W.B. Yeats. Um, there's just a lot to be said about what he did for poetry, what he also just did for modernism as an idea, and Auden owed a great debt to to Yeats. We might say that Yeats was Auden's north, south, east, and west. Um, but also, while in Funeral Blues, there's a sense of not being able to move on, pack up the moon, dismantle the stars, or maybe dismantle the stars, pack up the moon. Here we kind of see how hurt itself creates a type of poetry, that somehow, um, part of being human too is that beauty grows out of hurt. And this poem captures that very very nicely, I believe. In memory of W.B. Yeats. He disappeared in the dead of winter, The brooks were frozen, the airports almost deserted, and snow disfigured the public statues. The mercury sank in the mouth of the dying day. What instruments we have agree. The day of his death was a dark, cold day. Far from illness, the wolves ran on through the evergreen forest. The peasant river was untempted by the fashionable keys. The peasant by morning tongues. The death of the poet was kept from his poems. Excuse me. But for him, it was his last afternoon as himself. Excuse me 1 second. It is allergy season, folks. But for him, it was his last afternoon. I think my voice is gone.
Delano, I'll read the rest and take a moment. But for him, it was his last afternoon as himself, an afternoon of nurses and rumors. The provinces of his body revolted. The squares of his mind were empty. Silence invaded the suburbs. The current of his feeling failed. He became his admirers. Now he is scattered among 100 cities and wholly given over to unfamiliar affections, to find his happiness in another kind of wood and be punished under a foreign code of conscience. The words of a dead man are modified in the guts of the living. But in the importance and noise of tomorrow, when the brokers are roaring like the beasts on the floor of the bourse, and the poor have the sufferings to which they are fairly accustomed, and each in the cell of himself is almost convinced of his freedom. A few thousand will think of this day as one thinks of a day when one did something slightly unusual. What instruments we have agree. The day of his death was a dark, cold day.
I think I'm back. Yeah, I'm partially back. But enough back to push forward. You are silly like us. Your gift survived it all. The perish of rich women, physical decay, yourself. Mad Ireland hurt you into poetry. Not Ireland has her madness and her weather still, where poetry makes nothing happen. It survives in the valley of its making, where executives would never want to tamper. Flows on south from ranches of isolation and the busy griefs, raw towns that we believe and die in. It survives a way of happening, a mouth. Earth received an honored guest. William Yeats is laid to rest. Let the Irish vessel lie empty of its poetry. In the nightmare of the dark, all the dogs of Europe bark, and the living nations wait, each sequestered in its hate. Intellectual disgrace stares from every human face, and the seas of pity lie locked and frozen in each eye. Follow poet, follow right to the bottom of the night with your unconstraining voice, still persuade us to rejoice. With the farming of a verse, make a vineyard of the curse, sing of human unsuccess in this rapture of distress. In the deserts of the heart, let the healing fountain start. In the prison of his days, teach the free man how to praise. Yay, WH. What a fun little poem, but also a sad little poem. And we also kind of see in this poem as well, Auden as the complete master of verse. That third section, you may recognize little tiger, tiger burning bright in the forest of the night. Little little William Blake with those iambic dimeter, or maybe it's trimeter, iambic trimeters happening. Um, and each section here has its own sort of cadence. But that second stanza, I would like to just draw our attention to, particularly the notion that Mad Ireland hurt you into poetry, but going even a little further than that, for poetry makes nothing happen. And I'm not sure if Auden himself agrees with that, or even if we agree with that. Because there's always, or at least how Auden saw poetry, is that poetry enables a personal development that enables a full participation and leads to the creation of decent societies. In other words, once one, as I said earlier, prepares that face to meet the faces that we meet, that sort of sense of an inner truth can then help us in the chaos of public life. And if one has one's own story kind of in place, you're able to still kind of create hope and good. And this is essentially what we have here when Auden in the third section says, writes, with the farming of a verse, make a vineyard of the curse, sing of human unsuccess in a rapture of distress. In the deserts of the heart, let the healing fountain start. In the prison of his days, teach the free man how to praise. And these contradictions are just so vital to Auden's vision that you need those creative tensions to happen in order to have a statement of any type of quote unquote truth. Particularly like those last two lines, in the prison of his days, teach the free man how to praise. Connects very well with what happens in the first section of this poem. And each in the cell of himself is almost convinced of his freedom. And both of these notions together get down to the social contract of Rousseau and of the 18th century, that essentially that our connections to one another are things that bind us together in community, and they're not to be entirely lamented, that there's something to be said for decency. um, Other thoughts here on this particular poem? Okay, we've got a good 10 minutes, and that's about, we can get a lot done in 10 minutes. So let's one more little point to kind of show the dystopian element that undergirds Auden's poetry, and this is called The Unknown Citizen. He was found, The Unknown Citizen, to JS/07/M378. This marble monument is erected by the state. He was found by the Bureau of Statistics to be one against whom there was no official complaint, and all the reports on his conduct agree that, in the modern sense of an old fashioned word, he was a saint. For in everything he did, he served the greater community, except for the war. Except for the war, till the day he retired, he worked in a factory and never got fired, but satisfied his employers, Fudge Motor Inc. He wasn't a scab or odd in his views. For his union reports that he paid his dues. Our report on his union shows it was sound. And our social psychology workers found he was popular with his mates and liked to drink. The press are convinced that he bought a paper every day and that his reactions to advertisements were normal in every way. Policies taken out in his name prove that he was fully insured, and his health card shows he was once in the hospital but left it cured. Both producers and research and high grade living declare he was fully sensible to the advantages of the installment plan and had everything necessary to the modern man: a phonograph, a radio, a car, and a Frigidaire. Our researchers into public opinion are content that he held the proper opinions for the time of year. When there was peace, he was for peace. When there was war, he went. He married and added 5 children to the population, which our eugenist says was the right number for a parent of his generation. And our teachers report that he never interfered with their education. Was he free? Was he happy? The question is absurd. Had anything been wrong, we should certainly have heard. Well, one can only wonder um, about this particular poem. It's really quite wonderful, um, particularly those last 2 lines. Was he free? Was he happy? The question is absurd. Had anything been wrong, we should certainly have heard. And so over 13 years, Auden has developed his thinking about the personal private identity with the public identity, and it reached a crescendo here with this poem, The Unknown Citizen. Because despite all the things that we know about to JS, it's 07/M/378, this doesn't seem like really much of anything to know about him. It is a look at someone from the outside, externally, and has and as Anna has pointed out over the course of these poems, is that there is something within that matters a lot more, and that it is crucial. The work of poetry is crucial in the sense that it enables each person to find a type of truth for him, her, or themselves. That's the work. And so poetry enables this kind of personal reflection to kind of deal with the outer chaos, to kind of say that once again. But this poem brings it to stark light. And this is 1939. If this poem were to be written in 2023, my goodness, there would be so many. I mean, how many cookies do we have on our devices telling us who we are, right? So, and again, this is also playful. We should keep in mind that Auden himself is, go back to that opening image of him with the book sprawled on the couch, and he's looking heavenward. He's a he's a little bit of a of a little rascal, shall we say, in the way he approaches the way he approaches society and what it means to actually know someone. What is a self? What is the self? And how does truth reside in all of this? So we've got time for one more. And we can get into the art of healing, or we can do archaeology. I think we go right to the end, Zoe, if you don't mind. Um, the art of healing, I highly recommend. The quote about music is from there. But archaeology is a very important one because in the beginning, in the very start of this, let history be my judge. Is that and this is the last poem Auden ever wrote, by the way, archaeology. He would die later in 1973. But Auden worked his way from thinking about history as a way of understanding human nature. And over the arc of his life, he began to kind of lean more towards the archaeological as a way of kind of excavating, or even as the great Adrienne Rich, feminist poet, would put it, how to dive into the wreck and find those stories. Um, we are all a collection of different things, and part of creating a narrative of meaning is that we have to find the threads that connect the things that make us who we are. So this is archaeology. The archaeologist Spade delves into dwellings vacanced long ago, unearthing evidence of life ways no one would dream of leading now, concerning which he has not much to say that he can prove the lucky man. Knowledge may have its purposes, but guessing is always more fun than knowing. We do not know, we do know that man from fear or affection has always graved his dead. What disaster the city, volcanic effusion, fluvial outrage, or a human horde agog for slaves and glory is visually patent. And we're pretty sure that as soon as palaces were built, their rulers, though glutton on sex and blanded by flattery, most often have yawned. But do grain pits signify a year of famine? Where a corn series peters out, should we infer some major catastrophe? Maybe, maybe. From murals and statues, we get a glimpse of what the old ones bowed down to, but cannot conceit in what situations they blush or shrug their shoulders. Poets have learned us their myths, but just how did they take them? That's a stumper. When Norsemen heard thunder, did they seriously believe Thor was hammering? No, I'd say. I'd swear that men have always lounged in myths as tall stories, that their real earnest has been to grant excuses for ritual actions. Only in rites can we renounce our oddities and truly be entired. Not that all rites should be equally founded. Some are abominable. There's nothing the crucified will like less than butchery to appease him. Coda. From archaeology, one moral at least must be drawn, to wit, that all our school textbooks lie. What they call history is nothing to vaunt of, being made, as it is, by the criminal in us. Goodness is timeless.
Well, on that note, we've hit 1 o'clock Eastern. Thank you so much, Delano, for your incredible reading of today's selections from W.H. Auden. And thank you all so much for joining us for today's May Poetry Lunch Hour. I want to offer a round of applause to Delano for leading
Thank you,
this
everyone.
meaningful discussion. And as a reminder, a recording of today's event will be posted and sent out to you all by the end of the week, and up on our website as well for future review. And we invite you to join us again next month for our June session of the Poetry Lunch Hour. Throughout the summer, Delano will be continuing to host these lunch hours with a different selection of poetry from a variety of great poets. Please stay tuned and keep checking back for upcoming registration for June's poetry lunch hour. And please join us again on June 15th. Other dates throughout the summer include July 13th and August 10th. So we look forward to welcoming you back at those dates.
Definitely, I'm a happy reading, everyone.
And as well, if any questions arise regarding the Poetry Lunch Hour series or other upcoming events, please don't hesitate to reach out to us via email at events@completedlife.org. And for general inquiries, please email info@completedlife.org. Thank you all again, and wishing you a wonderful rest of your week.
Bye-bye. Thank you.